समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
There is unrest in India's neighborhood. First Bangladesh, now Nepal. There is friction with the United States of America after Donald Trump's tariff war, though the US president seemed to walk back that friction just a little bit. And there is a cautious rapprochement with China. With the world in turmoil and the neighborhood of India immediately precarious, India's foreign policy and strategic doctrine has perhaps undergone and is still undergoing a reset. We'll try and understand that reset today with veteran diplomat and former Foreign Secretary Kanwal Sibal in just a moment. I'm Barkha Dutt, you're with the Mojo Story. The scenes out of Nepal underline what I'm talking about. And unrest in our immediate neighborhood. We've seen these scenes in Bangladesh, in Sri Lanka before, and now we're seeing them in Nepal, where the Prime Minister has just resigned. This after mass protests by the country's Gen Z, protesting corruption, protesting the ban on social media that has just been taken back. The unrest in the immediate neighborhood is part of security and geopolitical challenges that India is grappling with. These challenges have come ever since Trump has declared a tariff war, slapping a 50% tariff on India, 25% of which Trump has claimed as penalty for the purchase of Russian oil. The hypocrisy in this has been called out repeatedly. But in these images that came out of China, perhaps was the beginning of the walking back, at least from Trump in rhetoric. His aides, however, is a different story. Trump's trade advisor Peter Navarro has lashed out at India and China again, using the word vampire for them. He's also threatened this time that however this ends, it won't end well for India. This even as the Americans are cozying up with Pakistan and Asim Munir, an American delegation signing a new agreement with Asim Munir in the room with Pakistan's Shehbaz Sharif. There's a lot to talk about. India is facing a set of geopolitical challenges both in the immediate neighborhood and on the global stage, and a strategic doctrine is adapting itself even as we speak. I want to welcome to the program now our newsmaker today, former Foreign Secretary Kanwal Sibal is with us. Welcome to the program, sir. It's good to see you here. Let me start by actually asking you to take an overview. This isn't the first time that India is facing a number of challenges where our agility, our quick thinking, our political fortitude, our strength is being tested. If you had to take an overview, the large parts of the world seem in turmoil. It isn't just us. There's a kind of upending of geopolitics as we understand it. What is your overview?
I think we are going through a change in the international environment. This had begun even before Trump came onto the scene, and the manner in which he has begun wrecking the foundations of the international order, both economic and political, that the United States itself had set up and nurtured ever since 1945. Thing is that the West is losing its hegemony. It's on the back foot. The G7 is not as powerful as it used to be because power has shifted eastwards. And the fulcrum of that shift is China. The tremendous and unprecedented rise of China so quickly has shifted global balances of power. It's the biggest manufacturing country in the world. And it's not merely a question of manufacturing size, but they have now very consciously over the years developed a hold on critical raw materials and critical technologies. America had the impression until 3, 4 years ago that they had a technology lead and that it would take some years for China to catch up. But they began to discover that this was not so. And now this has come out very much in the open that United States has lost its capacity to really pressure China as they thought they might. And you can see it in the case of tariffs where Trump, as you mentioned, had imposed 50% tariffs on us with 25% penalty tariffs because we buy Russian oil, notwithstanding the fact that China is a far bigger buyer of Russian oil and gas. You know, we are buying discounted Russian oil. So we have not broken any sanctions on any kind of uh, system that the United States and the West has put in place in order to deprive Russia of extra revenues. But China gets its oil and gas through pipelines, which is not subject to any discount, et cetera, et cetera. But that's not been taken into account. The short point is that the United States has now revised totally its outlook on how they're going to manage uh, globally in order to rebuild their economy, retain their advantage in the technology sector, draw investment back into India. All that thing about resilient supply chains and trusted supply chains and whatever has been actually discarded by the Trump administration. They want countries to come and invest in United States and build up manufacturing capacity there. You see that in the kind of trade deals which are signed with the EU and Japan and Korea. All these countries have promised millions of dollars of investment uh, in the United States. And in the case of Japan, they have humiliated Japan so badly that one of the reasons why the Japanese Prime Minister recently resigned is because Trump forced on Japan to invest $550 billion in United States, but hand over the control of these funds to President Trump to decide where these would be invested. And which reminded me actually of the medieval ages when you pay tribute to the emperors. So here was Japan paying to the American emperor. On in the case of the EU, look what they've done. Now that's another thing. Since we're talking about the changes in the international scene, who could have imagined that Trump would actually spurn the one relationship, the one alliance, which is actually at the root of Western hegemony all these last 70 plus years, and that is the transatlantic alliance. But he had already begun in his first term to say NATO has outlived its utility and forcing Europe to actually spend more on their own defense, take on more responsibilities, etc., etc. But in the second term, he really has humiliated Europe. And in this so-called framework agreement, Europe has been forced to agree to invest $750 million in the next years to buy American LNG and $600 billion of investment, and of course buying U.S. defense equipment. So actually, it appeared, at least one could see that the logic might have been, and at times Trump expressed that look, I'm going to concentrate on China. China is the threat. So you, Europe, you look after your own security. You have actually ridden on our back all these years. Time has come for you to spend more money on your defense. So force them to increase, at least commit themselves to increase their defense spending to 5% of GDP. It's not going to happen, but at least he has forced them on paper to agree. And then, of course, he's confused everybody by also being very soft on China. He began by being tough. He reached up to 120, 140% tariffs or whatever, and then climbed down. And now it's only 30% tariffs. And he's looking for a big, beautiful deal and talks about his admiration for Xi. In fact, the only foreign president that he by name, invited to his inauguration was President Xi of China. And now he talks about visiting China this year. And of course, it's amusing how he reacted to the Chinese parade at the SCO summit. Um, and he said, I'm sure the Chinese wanted me to watch, and I was watching,
Yeah.
etc., etc. So the long and short is that this kind of upheaval that we are seeing globally puts India in a challenging situation where
Yeah.
we now have to manage different pressures. We have to carve a way out to make sure that our independence in decision making, our strategic autonomy, etc., is preserved. Because remember, we have difficult relations with China, and now that we have difficult relations with the United States, it makes our diplomatic task more difficult. Now, if United States, for example, withdraws or dilutes its commitment to the Quad and the
Yeah.
Indo-Pacific concept loses its salience, then what do we do? Do we then try and make up to China to the extent that we can? But huge risks there because with our difficulties in our relations with the United States, our hands vis-a-vis China is weakened, and China will therefore take big advantage of that, or as much advantage as possible, to strike a favorable deal for themselves. And therefore, we can't actually reach out to China beyond a certain point because there are certain very important bottom lines which must be taken care of before we can begin the process of opening up to China in any serious
Yeah.
way. On the border, China has not given any sign of de-escalation and of course demobilization subsequently. On the trade deficit, I know we have been pressing China for all these years to actually open up their market towards us. And we've seen all these years, despite our pleading, the deficit has continued to balloon. And today is $100 billion. This
Yeah.
can't carry on. And then, of course, they are now very subtly, although mind you, now they're saying that they have promised sort of that they will look at all the denial of uh, certain critical materials, certain critical equipment, and boring machines for tunnels and fertilizers of a certain kind. They say they'll look at it, but there's no commitment. So, in their own subtle way, like the Americans and others do, they are also, uh, in a sense, sanctioning us or denying us access to certain products and technologies. So we have then to see how we can deal with China in a pragmatic way, but also standing our ground so that we
Yeah.
do not yield unnecessarily to the new blandishments that we see coming from China. Their ambassador is very active in this regard. Uh,
Correct.
we have to keep our cool.
Let me come to China in just a moment and just ask you a couple of things on how you read the U.S. situation. We saw Trump go from lamenting that perhaps India and Russia had been lost to China forever, to a few hours later talking about how he shared a special bond with Prime Minister Modi, how there was nothing to worry about, reminiscing about the time they stood in the Rose Garden together and so on. And a lot of people felt that maybe he was walking back some of his rhetoric, maybe this was the off-ramp moment. The Prime Minister also took to social media, went on to X and said he fully reciprocated the perception of the specialness of India and US relations. Since then, however, it's not as if Trump's aides have shut up. Right? We've seen Navarro, for example, his trade advisor, getting more and more unhinged every single day. In the last few hours, he's used the word vampires to describe India and China and the BRICS nations. He's threatened that however this ends, it won't end well. You've had other officials talking about a coordinated EU and American sort of sanction or tariff regime against India. Hence, do you believe that anything has changed, or do you believe it's a good cop, bad cop approach?
I won't give too much importance to the change of tone of Trump. Because remember, even when Prime Minister went there in February, he was very courteous. And I gather from the inside that he was very respectful. At the same time, he publicly was berating us for being the tariff king, and his obsession that we can't trade with India, but India sort of has a huge deficit balance of uh, huge positive balance with us, etc., etc. But he never said anything personally against Modi. So therefore, in his latest remarks, to talk about his personal friendship with Modi is, in his case, uh, there is consistency in that. But even when he made this relatively softer comment, he did say that India continues to buy oil from Russia, and I'm disappointed. Uh, but I have this personal relations, this and that. But don't worry. But this is the mood of the moment. This is the mood of the moment, uh, and he wants to show that he's under control, that he can deliver a blow to India, and then also give the impression that he's softening the blow. So he has, therefore, uh, what should I say, the initiative always, and India will dance to that initiative. Now, in this particular case, I think the calculation, and not wrongly, was that if Trump made some soft noise, Prime Minister could react positively, so that the downward slide in rhetoric on both sides could stop, and hopefully there would be now a better and improved atmosphere in our ties. At least
Has that happened? You think that's
presidential.
happened?
But you mentioned Navarro. I think Navarro has gone off his rocker. I think he's become a mental case. The kind of things that he's saying. No sensible person with any
Yeah.
iota of responsibility would say the kind of things that he's saying about India. It's become very personal. And he's become very rancorous because there has been attacks on him, not only by Elon Musk but also by the Indian social media, and he's really rattled. He's really rattled. Much more important are the statements that are coming from Besant as well as the uh, the
Commerce Secretary Howard
Commerce
Lutnick. Yeah.
Howard Lutnick. And they have continued to be negative. And Besant has just said, as you quoted just now,
Yeah.
that Trump, Vance, and van der Leyen had a meeting, and they're going to press the European Union to apply secondary sanctions on those who are buying Russian oil. So now the idea is that Europe should actually also apply sanctions on India, so that India, as Lutnick says, will come to Trump and says, "Sir, we are sorry." This is what he said. It's utterly ridiculous. Shows utter disrespect for a sovereign country, especially like India, to say that its leader should come and say sorry. Sorry for what? In fact, it's the Americans who should say sorry. It's Trump who should say sorry. It's all these fellows around him. Sorry for the language. Some of them sound like barking dogs. They are the ones who should say sorry. But nevertheless, I don't think Europe will do it because Europe actually is cornered, and it wants to have other openings. And the obvious opening, now that the relationship with America at various levels has become very difficult, including the economic relationship, they have to look for other openings, and India is the obvious opening. And hence, all this calendar of visits from the EU in order to see if we can tie up the FTA as quickly as possible. But and the US and Europe is not going to also impose any sanctions on China, because then if Europe were to do that, the Europeans would ask, how is it that we are being asked by Americans to impose sanctions on China, but the United States itself is not doing that. So we are becoming pawns in the game. Why should we do that? So,
Yeah.
but nevertheless, the fact that the Americans at such a responsible level are parroting this line that more pressure should be put on India uh, actually contradicts a little bit what we saw as a kind of a softening of posture
Yeah.
towards India by Trump himself. And the point here I'd like to make is this. Now, what Trump has done is to link a trade issue with a non-trade issue, as our foreign minister has said at the BRICS meeting quite rightly.
Yeah.
Now, if he doesn't get his way with the Russians, as I don't think he will, then how can he then make a gesture which would then appear to be a softening of posture towards Russia? If he if there's a breakthrough
So
with Russia,
he needs a face saver if there is no breakthrough with Putin, basically.
no, in fact, he doesn't have a face saver. A
No,
face
that's
saver
what I'm
would
saying.
be
That's what I'm saying. You're saying that unless he had a breakthrough on Russia, Ukraine, he has no way to walk back from the position he's taken
exactly,
vis-a-vis India. Yeah.
exactly, because then he would look like he's the loser, not the winner, and he wants to be a
Correct.
winner in every situation. And
Correct.
then, I mean, how can we then become a pawn in the larger game he has of using others to pressure Trump, now to pressure Putin to yield on the U.S. demands on Russia? He's not going to yield on the fundamental issues that divide still United States and Putin. He will not do that. Now, Putin is playing a very, very, very sophisticated psychological game. He's praising Trump. In fact, he sort of is pretending that he's so happy that Trump is still alive. The sort of comments he makes. Now, for him, it's very important that Trump keep reaching out to him. Europe is totally sidelined. So Europe's prestige, its geopolitical role globally is diminishing as a result of what Trump is doing in terms of on a European security issue, keeping the Europeans out of the discussions. So, A, there is engagement with the United States. B, Europe is being humiliated, and Europe's hands are tied, so their options are limited. Plus, he's dangling to Trump. Trump is a totally transactional fellow. You know, there are two sovereignties in the United States. One is the sovereign U.S. nation, and one is the sovereignty of Trump. Now, when he actually will, if there's a clash between these two sovereignties, his sovereignty will actually take precedence over. Now he's looking at his tenure to make as much money as possible for himself and his
Yeah.
family,
Yeah.
and for making sure that after 3.5 years, he comes out, he himself comes out, and his business interests, they come out the winners. So the Putin is therefore dangling to him the prospects of access to the raw materials of Russia. Trump also feels that if there is some kind of a solution, American companies can gain enormously, and he'll have an interest in some of them in terms of reconstruction and everything else in Ukraine. And similarly, you mentioned earlier this trade deal not trade deal, investment MOU between USS and
Pakistan.
You know, there is a interest of the family involved in this.
The cryptocurrency links between Trump's family and
Yeah.
Pakistan. Yeah.
Exactly. So he will use this occasion to promote the business interests of businessmen close to him in various ways, and one will discover the links between that and his own family members. So this is the
Is
kind of
how
problem
you
that we have to face in
see the cozying up? Is that how you see the cozying up between Trump and Asim Munir? Is it driven by business? Some people say
Yes.
it's driven by the fact that the lobbying firm that the Pakistanis hired is run by Trump's former bodyguard. Some people speak of this business link. Others say it's because Pakistan nominated him for a Nobel Prize, and his ego is so big that he's very susceptible to flattery. How do you see it, sir?
That he's susceptible to flattery is of course true. If you have watched that cabinet meeting,
Yes.
where every single cabinet member
Yes.
engages in flattery, obsequiousness, obeisance, which is embarrassing.
Yeah.
I mean, it is Kim Jong Un style, where they go around and you know what Lutnick says. I don't have to tell you; you've seen that yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if the Norwegian Peace Committee had any sense, they'll give the Nobel Prize to you because of all the recipients of this prize, you are the most eligible in history. Now, can you imagine saying this publicly? Another labor secretary says that, your big portrait in front of the Department of Labor,
Yeah.
I don't know, that sort of warmed the cockles of her heart, things like that. So flattery is very much there. But I think yes, flattery is there, but it's more than flattery. It's also business interests.
Yeah.
And in this particular National Crypto Council that Pakistan has set up, and the stake they have taken in this other business with Trump's junior son and Witkoff's son, and they've tied up with the NSA of UAE, who pumped in $2 billion in this venture and gave 60% to the American side. And now Asim Munir was responsible for taking a share in the UAE NSA's business venture. And that's the connection. That's the connection. And insofar as this USSM or whatever company is concerned, I can tell you confidently that nothing will come out of it. Nothing will come out of it. Because when it comes to critical raw materials, critical minerals, first of all, they are extremely thinly spread. You have to crush the stones and extract these. And they're not like the veins of copper or iron or whatever. So they are actually very sparsely available here and there. So actually, getting the machinery in and then processing it, etc., people who are experts are telling me that it is a 10-year project to be able to actually do this realistically. So it's not going to happen. But
So it's more
it's good
symbolic.
for him to show. It's good for him to show.
Yeah.
And then people come to him, okay, this is the proposal, and he says fine, and then he can say that, look, I am getting so much business for United States of America, and then of course he gives these totally imaginary numbers that trillions of dollars are coming into the United States and stuff like that. This is part of the showmanship that he is engaging in, and this particular deal is part of that showmanship where he can tell everyone that, look, I'm getting business.
Yeah.
Getting
Let,
business
let me ask you. You've been very very sort of specific about what's happening with Trump, in Pakistan. Now, what about China? As you said in the beginning, we've got to be super cautious as we proceed ahead with China. We've had China's recent support to Pakistan in Operation Sindoor. We have the memories of Galwan. We do not have an entirely status quo ante situation in the Himalayas, which has taken us back to the pre-Galwan status quo ante. How do you see this sort of cautious rapprochement with China?
I think it is inevitable. Now, you look at the United States of America. It treats China, it has been treating China as its principal adversary. And from the time that the U.S. Secretary of State, previous one, described it as a pacing challenge. But in all their public statements during the Biden administration and subsequently, and people like the Undersecretary of State in the Department of War now, Helmut Colby, they are China hawks. They are China hawks. And yet, their trade figures, if you look at them, they have a $290 billion deficit with China. Overall trade is about $600 billion. I don't know the exact figure, but something like that. The United States very much wants to have a military-to-military dialogue with China. They do not want to have a conflict with China. They want to deter China, but don't want to have a conflict. They don't want China to take any rash step against Taiwan, which will force their hands. And they don't want their hands to be forced. And then the fact that he's spurning South Korea and Japan the way he is, clearly shows that he is not in a mood to confront China. And that has implications for Quad and everything else, as I said.
Correct.
Now, in that situation, in that context, if he also engages China the way he is, we have to engage China too. I mean, they're sitting right on top of us, and the
Yeah.
gap between us and them, economically and military, is very, very wide. Yes, we can stand our ground at the border, but we can't otherwise create a kinetic situation with China, which leads to a military conflict, which doesn't make any sense. Therefore, we must engage. Part of the engagement is calculated, and part of the engagement is forced on us because we depend on China for raw materials, for intermediate goods, uh, for certain for manufacturing, for manufacture the goods. We can't do without them. They are linked to our export potential, so we have to trade with them. Uh, at the same time, uh, uh, we also want to keep China engaged through trade, uh, which also China attaches importance to. Some of the soft noises they are making is because they see the road down, they see the road ahead, and they know that they're coming under pressure on the economic side from the
Yeah.
United States. If Trump is to believe, he thinks that he is going to bring China on his knees economically because of his weaknesses, etc., etc. True or
Yeah.
not, the fact is that China would also, therefore, want to keep its options open vis-a-vis India in terms of access to the market. And
Yeah.
therefore, the consistent position that let's sort of leave the border issue aside, but normalize ties in every other areas. And the Chinese ambassador now is repeating, constantly repeating that it's a
Yeah.
win-win situation for us. We can trade with each other. We can open up our economies to each other. And she says the dragon and the elephant can dance and stuff like that. That we are not rivals. We are uh, partners and stuff like that. So they're also giving us
Yeah.
some incentives to open up our
Yeah.
market and reverse some of our decisions. And there is now a body of opinion in India which thinks that we can do it, we should do it. Uh,
I mean, the jury will remain out on that given the somewhat tortured history of the recent years in terms of specifically China's support to Pakistan, whether at the United Nations or whether indeed militarily in Op Sindoor. I just, sir, want to ask you a last question. You know, Foreign Minister Jaishankar has spoken about multipolarity, strategic autonomy. As we adapt to this sort of challenging time, how do you think this multipolarity and the strategic autonomy will need to define itself?
well, multipolarity is a fact, though, mind you, uh, you have to be very clear about what you mean by multipolarity. If you mean by multipolarity that there'll be a few poles in the world, some countries which will be at the center of the pole, and around them there'll be a cluster of countries which will follow their lead, that's not going to happen. Uh, it, and if that happens, it'll be United States, which will certainly have all its alliance members and this and that, which will actually look upon the United States to give the lead in so many areas and provide security and everything else. And Russia would have the Central Asian states, as well as Belarus, etc., etc., as countries which would look up to the Russians in various ways, and Russia will be the pole for them. Now, so far as China is concerned, uh, China, it will not be the pole in the same way, but it is an economic pole. It's not a security pole, it's an economic pole. The other two are security poles too. And in the case of China, because of the BRI, the investments all over the world, the capacity actually to build infrastructure, uh, replace the West in terms of giving them financial support, etc., etc., which means that within the United Nations, etc., so as we have seen, China has a lot of hold over countries. Even on the Uyghur issue, if you remember, in the UN Human Rights Commission, they got uh, they couldn't be attacked. No resolution could be passed against them because they had countries supporting them, even the Gulf Islamic countries. So it'll be a pole in a different way. In our case, we are a developing pole, and as our economy becomes bigger and our capacity to use our additional economic strength to advance our political and security and strategic aims, we can also be a pole essentially in the neighborhood and very importantly in the Gulf countries. Because all these connectivity projects and whatever we are doing there will link, there's food security change, food security, connectivity, hydrogen connectivity, electricity connectivity, and then IMET and all that stuff. So we can be a pole in that sense, though we will have always difficulty with Pakistan and Bangladesh, and of course with Nepal every now and then. So if you define multipolarity like that, yes. But at the end of the day, it can never be a smooth operation. No country is going to take fully dictates from another country. Europe won't do that towards the United States.
Right.
Other countries won't do it vis-a-vis China. And you find that Kazakhstan and some other countries are always looking for ways and means to reduce their dependence on Russia and bring the Americans in and this and that. So if you look at multipolarity like that, or if you look at it theoretically, as people say, that 45% of the global GDP is now in the BRICS countries, and the internal population is even more or whatever. That if you take these facts into consideration, it's clear that there is a shift in global power, and therefore the world is no longer unipolar, which it was, and which Trump, if left to his devices, would like to make it one.
Absolutely.
Now, the last part, in answer to your question, is the prospects of bipolarity. And there is always that concern in strategic circles or analysis in strategic circles that US and China may head towards a G2 situation, a bipolar world. That China looks after, as was proposed by some Chinese strategists, that you look after the Atlantic area and we look after Asia. And that is why India, in all our statements, including Prime Minister's statement at SCO, multipolar world, but multipolar Asia.
That's right.
We don't want to accept the hegemony of China in Asia, and therefore no G2 so far as we are concerned. But there is always that kind of conversation that goes on.
Yeah.
So I think basically, to a final comment on your question, is that what there's all this talk about multipolarity and everything else is a product of the flux that we are seeing in international relationship, the international relations, and how the countries are relating to each other.
Well, as the Chinese would say, we certainly live in interesting times. Ambassador Sibal, former Foreign Secretary, veteran diplomat, thank you for breaking it down in an accessible fashion. Learned a lot from you and hope to talk to you again soon, because I have a feeling that we're going to have a headliner moment and our news cycle is going to be driven entirely by geopolitics and not so much domestic politics, because that's where the action is. Thank you so much, sir. Take care and see you soon.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Vote Her Story and support independent, robust journalism.